we learned a lot from Dean July's lecture last Saturday. I think that's clear. Um, One takeaway is the fact that the quality of political parties determine the quality of politics. Yan ang hindi na natin may iwasan. Ano? Bad political parties equals a broken political system. And the evidence of that statement or proof of that statement is us, the Philippines. No, we know how bad our political parties are, and we know that that contributes to the broken political system that we are enduring today. And that brings us to an urgent caveat for the BARM, for the Bangsamoro, who are now in the process of forming their own political parties. The caveat is political parties that will compete in the BARM elections, the BARM parliamentary elections, if they are mere clones of the political parties we have at the national level, then that doesn't bode well for the Bangsamoro parliament, because the quality of political parties will determine the quality of the Bangsamoro parliament. Specifically, the ability of the Bangsamoro parliament to deliver on the promises made by the BOL, by the Bangsamoro Organic Law, right? So we can actually say that the quality of political parties will determine the ability of the Bangsamoro to fulfill its self-determination aspirations, okay? Because it's really the quality of the political parties which will determine the ability of the Bangsamoro Parliament to deliver the promises of the BOL. This course is our intervention to prevent political parties in the BARM to become mere clones of the political parties that we have at the national level. Okay? Because obviously we want the BARM to be successful. We don't want it to be another quote-unquote failed experiment. Okay? But we learned also from Dean July's lecture that political party formation is not a simple task. It's actually a very complex and complicated task that requires different steps, different undertakings, and hence why the course is designed this way. So, but ultimately, we hope that the course will be a big help for the Bangsamoro political parties in the process of forming, or Bangsamoro emerging leaders like yourselves will find this useful in your own quest for political party formation. But before I proceed, let me just remind you, one of the requirements of the course is the submission of an essay at the end. No? So please bear in mind that this has to be submitted as part of your completion of the course on April 17. Now, you can write about any topic that you find interesting during the course. For instance, last Saturday, Dean July discussed internal democracy of political parties. That to me is an interesting topic that I can write about. So you can consider that. So the submission of the essay is also important as part of the processing of what you've learned. So please bear that in mind. Now, as I said, political party formation is a complex process and requires different steps. For my part, what I offered this morning is just one feature, one aspect of political party formation, and that's the constitutional underpinnings of genuine political parties. This means that when I try to analyze with you how genuine political parties are formed, I will look at it from the perspective of the Constitution, meaning I will mainly use constitutional principles and constitutional provisions to help us understand what are actually genuinely principled political parties. Now, I'd like to begin with this image. For me, this image is very important to start our quest to understand what are genuinely principled political parties, or GPP, G3P kung tawagin. Ano? Now, this image, for me, captures the link between political parties and the vibrancy of democracy. Okay? Now, yung donkey dito represents the Democratic Party and the elephant represents the Republican Party sa US. Now, what this picture depicts actually is that the way political parties operate, right, in a political system, it can contribute to the vibrancy of democracy, but it can also kill democracy, right? So bad political parties can kill democracy. And again, the evidence of that is us, no? The Philippines. And the way that our political parties, their penchant for forming super majorities behind a president. So that is the way political parties in our country kill democracy. And how do they do that? When they form supermajorities behind a president, what they actually do is they prevent the legislative perform its check and balance duty under the Constitution, right? Now that we all know that the check and balance duty comes from the principle of separation of powers, right? So in our Constitution, the power, political power, state power is allocated among three branches: legislative, executive, and judiciary. And under the principle of separation of powers, each branch has a duty to check on the other. So Congress has a constitutional duty to check on the executive, right? And vice versa. But because of the penchant of our political parties to form supermajorities behind an incumbent president, and I'm not just talking about the current one, even the former presidents were supported by supermajorities. That kind of phenomenon inhibits Congress to check on the performance of the president. So that undermines the principle of separation of powers. So that is one way of political party behavior kills democracy. Now that is particularly relevant for the BARM because in the BARM, there is now a new form of regional government, which is parliamentary ministerial form. Now that's very different from what we have at the national level, and in the parliamentary form, it's more difficult actually to maintain the separation of powers because the executive and the legislative are actually fused. No, the line that differentiates or that separates the executive and the legislative is blurred. So if in the parliament, in the Bangsamoro parliament, there is a supermajority, for sure that will undermine the ability of the parliament itself to check on the government of the day. And we don't want that to happen in the BARM because that would entail or that will actually allow the government of the day full control of what's happening in the regional government. Now, we don't want that to happen. We don't want them unchecked. We don't want them not to be held accountable because that's not good governance. That doesn't equate to good governance. And in fact, we know when the executive is left unchecked, when the executive is not held to account, that means there's rampant graft and corruption, there is incompetence, and we don't want that to happen, right? Which is what actually what's happening at the national level, and not just this as administration, but in the past administration. Now, just to refer to a few information, no, a few numbers in democracy indices, our country always fails in terms of the evaluation on institutions, in governance institutions. So we are always perceived to be corrupt. We always perform with reference to rule of law. So anything on the side of institution, of governance, lagi tayong poor performer. But if you look at democracy in terms of civic engagement, voter participation, free expression, free speech, freedom of the press, we are always performing well. Lagi tayong mataas. Okay? Although may mga complaints, but we don't perform as poorly when compared to how our institutions are evaluated. So, mababa yung tingin nila sa governance natin, but and yet yung people power, yung civic engagement, laging mataas tayo doon. So, lagi tayong nasa middle ground lang. And that translates to our sort of mediocre performance when it comes to human development. We're always just in the middle kasi parang nagbabalance out how poor our institutions are really undermines how empowered our people are, right? So that's why when scholars and other observers look at our democracy, they describe it as flawed democracy because our no matter how empowered we are, we're always constricted and constrained by how poor our institutions are. And that imbalance is it can be explained many ways, but it can be partially explained by our Constitution. If you look at the Constitution, particularly these two provisions, it's very clear what the emphasis is, right? And in fact, our Constitution really puts a premium on people empowerment. That's why it's called the People Power Constitution. Well, understandable because it is a product of the 1986 People Power Revolution, right? So the 1987 Constitution really reflects the ethos of empowering the people. But here is where political parties become relevant. In section 1, this principle that I underlined, this is supposed to be, or this is designed to be enforced, quote unquote, through political parties, right? So the people express or enforce sovereignty or their authority through the government through political parties. Diba, in Dean July's lecture, we learned that political parties is the vehicle where the people organize themselves and compete for compete to gain government power, right? So it is supposed to be through political parties where people gain or enforce this principle, right? Where they can exercise government authority. But because we don't have genuine political parties, guess who the people rely on to enforce this principle? Well, they rely on politicians, right? So the people, to enforce this principle of sovereignty and government authority, what they do is they rely on politicians, political leaders, sad to say, dynastic politicians, so that, quote unquote, they can exercise government authority. But unfortunately, what happens is what is has developed is really a patronage relationship between politicians and the citizens, and we know the bad result of that relationship. The bad result is in Section 4, instead of a government that serves and protects the people, what we have is a government that serves and protects the supporters of those in power. Okay, so uh, political contestation becomes really partisan contestation. Right? So political parties become vehicles of partisanship because it is through the political parties, not the genuine ones, but the current types that we have, uh, filled with politicians and dynastic interests that try to gain positions in government to serve their supporters. Okay, so we do not see genuine political parties at the national level, and the result of that is the inability of the people to be in control of the government. Right, the people are unable to ensure that the government that they have serve and protect their interests. Now, the Constitution, unfortunately, has very little to offer when it comes to political party regulation. Okay? Our Constitution only says that we have a free and open party system. Now, what exactly means is not clear, no? When you just look at the constitutional document. In fact, it only says that free and open party system shall be allowed to evolve according to the free choice of the people. So what does that mean exactly is unclear. Now, the Constitution has left it to Congress to establish a political party regime or political party regulatory regime. Now, we don't have that yet. What we have is really an outdated one under the Omnibus Election Code. And it's pretty slim as well with regards to the establishment of a genuine political party regime. But, and we're still waiting for Congress to enact an updated law that will ensure that we have a genuine political party regime. Unfortunately, has not happened because it's counterintuitive. As Dean July said when he talked about the enactment of an anti-political dynasty law, why it's like appointing or hiring Dracula to guard the blood bank, right? It's why would our lawmakers do something that will cause their demise, right? So it's something like that. So it's counterintuitive, and it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. Okay, the Constitution can only offers Section 10 with regards to regulation of candidates. It's pretty thin, no? So bona fide candidates should be free from any form of harassment and discrimination. But other than that, our Constitution offers nothing with regards to what genuinely principled political parties should be. Now let's look at the Bangsamoro Organic Law. I want to start with this provision because it really sets the tone. You know? So under the BOL, first and foremost, there should be a democratic political system. So emphasis on democratic. No? So again, because the BUL mandates a democratic political system, immediately political parties become very relevant. Okay? Remember what I said, political parties determine the quality of the political system. So bad political parties, broken political system, right? Bad political parties can kill a democratic political system. But what makes the BUL different from our constitution is this. Okay? The BUL specifically mandates the formation of genuinely principled political parties. I call the G3P, genuinely principled political parties. So this is unique to the BUL. So our task now, at least for us, while we wait for the Bangsamoro electoral code, our task now is to put some meat behind this phrase, genuinely principled political parties. What are they, right? So the formation of genuinely principled political parties, I mean, I don't have to tell you, it's not an easy task, right? It's it's a challenging task. Not just because we sort of have no experience of this, given the dearth of genuinely principled political parties at the national level, right? So this one, we have to define ourselves. We are given the opportunity as well as the responsibility to define or to give life to what are genuinely principled political parties. They don't have the formation of the G3P does not happen in a vacuum. No? There has to be a context. And as I said, we are in a fortunate position to define for ourselves what that context is. What's that ecosystem where this genuinely principled political parties can arise from, right? Now, obviously, that's up for debate, and I am going to offer only one view of what context or what that context can be. Okay. Now, let me introduce to you this thing or this phenomenon called the politics of problem solving. Now, this idea came to me because first, the Bangsamoro, well, the Philippines for that matter, is beset by a lot of problems. Okay? Our country, because of not just because of the pandemic, but mainly because of the pandemic, but even before that, we already know that we are facing a lot of problems. It's the same situation in the BARM, but I would say what really puts the BARM in a different place or in a distinct place is the BARM is in a very strong position to find solutions to their problems. Given the abundance of resources in the region, both natural and human, they are in a very strong position to find solutions to their problems. And that's why political party building or political party formation is very, very important in the region. Now, just to talk a bit about what this politics of problem solving is. So this idea came from a movement in the US called the No Labels movement. No? Because the citizens, some citizens of the United States felt, I think this was in 2017, right, just right after Trump won, that the parties, their parties, Republicans and Democrats, we're more concerned about their party politics. No? They were more concerned about partisanship, and they've sort of ignored the real problems a lot of Americans were dealing with. So they were more preoccupied at fighting one another, that they've um, forgotten that many Americans were actually facing a lot of difficulty. So this no labels movement, kaya nga ang pangalan nila is no labels, they said, let's do away with the labels and let's try to focus on the problems and find solutions. Now, this no labels movement, it led to the organization of the problem-solving caucus in the US Congress. So a group of lawmakers, both from the Democrats and the Republican Party, following this mentality that let's try to solve problems, let's try to set aside partisanship and focus on problems. They organized the problem solvers caucus. So this politics of problem solving is an antidote to hyper partisanship in party politics. Right? Now, again, this is what the context of political parties in the BARM should be, given that the BARM is facing a lot of problems, and we want our political parties in the region to be focused more on solving problems than being caught up in hyper partisanship. Okay. Now, what exactly is this politics of problem solving? What does it entail? It entails, number one, the process of identifying what are the problems faced by the citizens. In our case, probably it also involves the process not just of identifying problems, but of prioritizing problems, because we have so many problems. The process involves ano ba yung uunahin natin? So because we can't solve all, right? The politicians, political parties, they can't solve all our problems. So the process of identifying problems most likely will actually be prioritizing the most urgent ones. And then the second part of the process is to identify or to formulate commonsensical, evidence-based solutions. Right? So identifying problems, formulating solutions. So that is the politics of problem solving. And we want our political parties to have that kind, or to exist or to function in that context. Okay. Okay, let's proceed. So the politics of problem solving means political parties must put value in facts, put value in the truth. Okay? Because if you identify problems, if you are in the process of prioritizing problems, you cannot. You have to be loyal to what the reality is, right? What are the facts? What are shown by the facts? Right? And when you analyze for solutions, it has to be evidence-based. Okay? formulating solutions must be based on evidence-based analysis. Okay? Now, when we put a premium on the truth and facts, necessarily the serious threat to that is disinformation. Okay? So political parties who are engaged in this politics of problem solving, they have to uh, be aware of the serious threat of disinformation, because disinformation can prevent them from identifying the real problems, and it can prevent them from undertaking evidence-based analysis, to formulate solutions to the problems. So it is incumbent upon political parties engaged in the politics of problem solving to be aware, well, first and foremost, not to be purveyors of this information, but to be also aware of really the danger of disinformation. Now, disinformation has to be distinguished from misinformation. Okay? Misinformation can be corrected easily. Okay? But disinformation is more nefarious. It's more dangerous, and it requires more sophistication in terms of addressing it. And for political parties, that's part of the skill that they have to develop. How to combat disinformation, particularly in the political arena. Okay? Now, okay, disinformation becomes relevant, or becomes more relevant for us in the Philippines, because politics now in our country is being played in social media. Okay? This was really obvious, or this became obvious in 2019, right? When many of the candidates were very active in social media. And we have to talk about it because we we are the social media capital of the world. Okay? Filipinos spend about 10 hours in the internet. More than, or almost half of that time is spent in social media. And a lot of the politics, I expect, and maybe most of you expect, a lot of the politics that will happen from now on until 2022 will happen or will occur in social media. Okay? And actually, I have no complaints that social politics is happening now in social media, because social media has a democratizing effect. No? It actually increases the chances to connect, of people to connect with one another. It amplifies the ability of people, including political parties, to advocate, and also to gain access to the advocacies of others. So social media increases or heightens the ability of individuals and political parties to engage with one another. Right? Social media elevates the public discourse. However, disinformation threatens that possibility. Disinformation can poison uh, uh, public discourse in social media. We know that, right? So political parties engage in the politics of problem solving have to be aware about disinformation, especially if they are very active in social media. Right? Now, let me just go back to our understanding of genuinely principled political parties. Okay, for me, taking off from our understanding of uh, the politics of problem solving, genuinely principled political parties recognize the two facts of politics, the two realities of politics. Number one, hyper-partisanship, which essentially means putting political interests above everything else, is detrimental to the health of the nation and to the welfare of the people. Okay? Hyper-partisanship, okay, where political parties are more concerned about fighting one another, will be bad for all in the long run. Okay? So if you are a genuinely principled political party, you don't want to engage in hyper partisanship. The second reality of politics is there are some instances where partisanship needs to be set aside. Okay? We all know that politics and partisanship go hand in hand. No? Magkasama yan. Kaya nga political contestation, naglalaban-laban talaga. But there are certain instances, in fact, there are certain problems that a nation faces that political parties must set aside being combatants or being protagonists. And they must find the will, to come together and work for the common good. So if you are a genuinely principled political party, you will recognize that fact as well. That while you are a creature of partisanship, you know that there will also be instances that that as a political party, you have to work with other political parties for the common good. So genuinely principled political parties are exhibit those two qualities in the context of the politics of problem solving. Number one, that they will avoid hyper-partisanship at all costs. And number two, that they recognize that even though they engage in partisanship as a matter of course, that there will also be a time that they will be called to work with other political parties for the common good. Now, with that recognition, genuinely principled political parties in the BARM must therefore be very wary of disinformation and how it works in the political process. Right? So first, they must recognize, this is just to summarize, that disinformation poisons the political process. It poisons the public discourse because it opens the door for hyper-partisanship. Disinformation makes political parties, politicians, susceptible to hyper-partisanship. And when politicians and political parties become hyper-partisan, what they do is just fight amongst each other. It becomes an us versus them scenario. And unfortunately, we're sort of seeing that now in the BARM, right? This idea of if you are not with us, you're against us. We're sort of seeing that kind of sentiment, and we have to avoid that. Because again, I want to bring it back to the idea that the BARM is beset by a lot of problems. And political parties, while they are, by their very essence, they have to compete with one another. They have to be open to cooperation, and they have to be open that they are all working for the common good, and which is for the betterment of the region. Disinformation in social media is even more dangerous because they can make election discourse hostile and toxic. Okay, and when that happens, okay, that translates to a divided community. Again, emphasizing that when that happens, public discourse is poisoned, and the community, the political parties, lose their ability really to find common ground. They lose their ability really to find solutions for the common good. Okay? So disinformation, particularly disinformation in social media, is a threat to the evolution of a mature political discourse in the BARM. Now, the only way, and therefore, rather, genuinely principled political parties must be equipped to fight disinformation. Right? They must, first and foremost, they must not be purveyors of disinformation, but they must have the skill and they must have the wherewithal to combat disinformation in the political sphere. Now, I'd like to suggest, for you, as you form your own political parties and develop your own capabilities to combat disinformation, I'd like to suggest this book. This is free to the public, and in fact, if you click on to the image, it will bring you to the link where you can download the book. Okay? Now, I like this book is very informative because it lays down how disinformation has become an organized industry in our country. Okay? Now, the authors here worked on the 2019 election, and they really clearly outlined how disinformation has become an industry in the Philippines. And now I'm learning that it's not just an industry that is lucrative during elections. No? It's now even lucrative when there's no election. So if we want to preserve political discourse in the BARM, if we want to preserve the electoral process in the BARM, I mean, free from the poison of disinformation, then political parties, if they are to be genuinely principled, they have to know how to fight disinformation. And I hope that this book can begin the process of how you, as the principles of political parties being formed in the region, how you establish your own way or your own mechanisms to fight disinformation. Okay.